Across the world, people have their housing costs taken away as much as half of their income. Have you ever thought of trying to change that? The good news is there is a way. House hacking is real, and we are here to show you how other people just like you have made it happen. Welcome to the House Hacking Podcast. And here is your host, house hacking expert, Andrew Kerr.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. We appreciate you tuning in. We know these are still really difficult times. And like I had mentioned on a previous episode, for the podcast and for our channel, we're not going to try to be experts at all. And we're also not going to provide any coronavirus news. There's so many other places out there where you can find that. And we're going to continue to focus on house hacking. And while right now might not be the perfect time for you to start a house hack, it's a great opportunity to pause, think about your financial house and what you can do to start rebuilding or strengthen it coming later in the year and the next year. And there's no better way to do that with house hacking. It's a great way to help reduce your housing costs. Now, let's really sort of talk about today's episode. You know, one of the biggest things I hear people talk about why they can't do a house hack is simply because they have a family. And while most people say they won't do a house hack or can't do a house hack because they have a family, I really wanted to focus on today's episode with Cheryl because she moved from essentially a single family house with a family to doing a house hack. And that's really unheard of. And if she can do it, anyone else out there can do it. And not only did she do a house hack and reduced her living costs, they got more space and they got an amazing location. So with that said, we really appreciate you tuning in this week, and let's go ahead and bring on Cheryl. Well, Cheryl, thank you so much for being on the show. How are you doing today and where are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from Madison, Wisconsin. I'm doing really good. I am sitting and looking out at the lake and enjoying our latest house hack.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited about your story. I know I've heard a little bit about it, but why don't you just, a good place to start is give us this nice high-level summary of what your house hack is.
So this summer, we just closed on a triplex, and our plan was to move our whole family of 4 in and occupy 2 of the 3 units as our single-family residence. But we are going to maintain them with separate kitchens and bathrooms so that eventually when the kids move out, we can go ahead and rent out that other unit and live in a single unit of the 3.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. I mean, I'm so excited about this because I think this is this really interesting approach that I haven't really heard anyone do yet. I mean, so let's really just sort of dig into this. You know, how'd you decide to do a house hack? I mean, how'd you first hear about house hacking, or did you just have this idea and then realize later it's actually called house hacking? I mean, how did it all sort of come about?
Well, that's exactly it. We really didn't go into this looking for a house hack. We've been living in this small single family 2-bedroom and really loved living small. We had about 850 square feet. But my kids are getting older, and as we start creeping up on the teen years, I just knew that it was going to get harder and harder because they're physically getting bigger and also their interests are getting bigger, and the amount of space that those hobbies and things take up was starting to push us out of that comfort zone. So we started looking at houses. We really love the neighborhood that we're in, and we only looked in a very small area. And we found a few houses that we really loved, but we weren't as fond of the price tag. It's a very hot neighborhood also, so prices are pretty high. And I was flipping through the neighborhood newsletter one day, and there was a little hand-drawn picture of a house, and it just said, for sale, call, and it had no details whatsoever, and I was intrigued. So I called, and it turned out to be this house. The previous owner had lived here for 40 years. She actually house hacked herself, living in various units over the years and living here with her kids and now by herself. So we looked at it, and when I first met with her, we honestly just looked at the first floor unit, which is where she lives. And I knew right away that we wanted to buy this house. It's in an awesome location, and it's very large and has a ton of potential. And so my husband, I'm just a creative thinker, and my husband kind of goes along with it. And so he was game, and we decided to go ahead and buy the house. And the kids are really excited because they're going to get their own bedrooms. Basically, it's 3 2-bedroom units. So the kids kind of have their own living space on the 3rd floor, and then we have our family space on the 2nd floor.
Okay, awesome. So, yeah. Oh man, oh my goodness. I just, so many things came up. I'm trying to figure out where I really want to start. All right. So you were living in this small, roughly 800 square foot, 2-bedroom house. I mean, how big is your family? So it's you, your husband, and how many kids do you have?
2 kids.
Okay. So in your previous housing, you and your husband were in a room, and the two young kids were sharing a room.
Exactly. And it was a really well-designed house. So if you came over, you would never guess that it was 850 square feet, honestly. People often commented on how we had a large house. But at the end of the day, we started feeling it. And especially 1 bathroom was really one of the big bottlenecks of the whole thing. And as the kids get older, they're wanting more privacy, and as I mentioned, have all of these things that they want to do, and having to clear off the dining room table every night to try and sit down and eat dinner just got to be a hassle. And we were ready for a little bit more space, but not really ready to make the commitment to like a huge 4-bedroom house that I knew would be kind of empty in 10 years. So this seemed like a really good option.
Yeah, absolutely. So that place that you were in before, were you just renting that, or did you own that place?
We've owned that house for about 17 years. I bought the house before my husband and I got married, and actually he moved in with his cousin. That was my very first house hack. So they were contributing to the expenses and made things a little bit easier on me.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, so you're doing that room rental house hack even before house hacking was sort of a thing. And what was your mortgage payment on that house before you moved out of it?
So we had refinanced over the years and used the cash out to buy different properties. But when we moved out, we had just recently refinanced to a 12-year mortgage, and our total payment was $1,207.
Great. And then did you end up keeping that place, or did you end up selling it after you moved out?
We kept it. Honestly, we love it so much that I couldn't bring myself to sell it. And honestly, we might move back to it someday. I don't know. It's hard to say how things will go, but we are currently renting it for $1,500 a month.
Oh, great. So you had this first property, your husband moved in with you, his cousin moved in for that 2nd bedroom. You had this sort of room rental house hack, and now it's a long-term rental for you. And that caused you to move into this triplex.
Exactly.
Okay. And then from when you decided to actually go find a bigger place, I mean, how long was it that you actually started looking, and before it sort of came up in the newsletter of this house in the area for sale?
I believe that we started looking seriously in January, February of this year. So it all came together really fast. In 6 months, we had already closed. Okay,
great. Yeah. And I mean, I think that's a sort of a normal time frame. I mean, back in like 2011, 2012, you could find a house and close on a house in 45 or 60 days because there were so many properties for sale. But yeah, 6 months seems like a pretty normal time frame. And then when you found the house and you saw it, was it originally built as a triplex, or was it a big old single family home that was divided up and converted into a triplex?
It was actually built as a duplex. And then at some point, someone renovated the attic to be a triplex.
Okay. And then let's talk about each of these different floors. So the first floor unit, how many bedrooms and bathrooms was that?
So all 3 units are 2-bedroom, 1 bathroom. And the bottom 2 units are 1,200 square feet. And the attic unit is about 750 square feet.
Okay, great. I mean, even the attic at 700 square feet is just slightly smaller than the house that you moved into. And when you saw the property, did you realize, this could be a rental, or this is actually the house for us and we could take over 2 of the units and rent the other unit?
I knew instantly that I wanted to live here. I really had an affinity for the house. You know, it's a historic home. It's got all of the beautiful big trim, and it's, as I mentioned, right across from the lake. So we get some lake views, and it really just felt like the right place for us to be.
Now, earlier you mentioned you were the more creative one that could sort of see this stuff, and your husband agreed to it. So was there any convincing here, or was he on board right away?
There was no convincing, but we've been married for almost as long, about 17 years. And honestly, he's gotten over the convincing part over all of those years. As he's gone along with all of my crazy schemes, he gets more and more comfortable with it.
So he just knew. He was like, all right, another one of her crazy ideas. I'm just going to say yes because I know her at this point. Okay, great. That's fun.
Yeah, he trusts me at this point.
Awesome. That's a really cool relationship to have. All right. So
it absolutely is.
When you bought the house, was this completely off market, or had it actually gone on the multiple listing service, the MLS, at this point?
It was off market, but we weren't the only ones who found it. There were 2 other offers that she was anticipating when we came to see the house. So we definitely wanted to put in an attractive offer. And what we ended up doing was we offered her asking price, and she wanted to remain as a tenant on that first floor unit. So we offered her really attractive rent, basically, to sweeten the deal. So she rents the first floor unit for $850, which is well below market.
Okay, and you really did that, as you're saying, just to make it attractive, where she said, hey, maybe they're not coming in with the highest price, or maybe they're equivalent, but they're also going to let me stay and rent back the unit so she doesn't have to move out.
I was definitely hoping that that would be a selling point for her, but also I felt like, I mean, she sold us the house for what I believe to be an under market price also. So I knew that this was a good deal, and that was my way of kind of giving back to her.
Yeah. And so what was the final sales price on the property?
So she was asking $352, and we came to an arrangement where we took the taxes out. So she did not pay us the taxes for the first half of the year. So she dropped the sale price to $348. And our appraisal right away was $470, which I actually think is even a little low, because a very similar house, and it's hard to find comps on something like a triplex, but a very similar triplex sold a couple months after we bought this for $550.
Oh, wow. I mean, it sounds like you got a killer deal. Like, I'm trying to just envision this in my head right now. It's a triplex, a beautiful old historic home. You got it for just, $348. It appraised for $470. There's views of the lake. I mean, this sounds pretty picture perfect. Did the house actually need any work? Was there any deferred maintenance? Did it need a new roof? Or was there anything you had to do to make it ready for you to rent it?
So it was move-in ready, truly. She had done some knob and tube removal. So we went ahead and did, cleaned up all of the knob and tube. We're in the process of doing that right now, actually. The electrician's working on it. And then we decided we wanted some cosmetic updates because it was a little dated on the inside. So we splurged on a marble bathroom on the second floor. We put in new tile and new fixtures in the third floor bathroom, put in new countertops in the kitchen, those kinds of things.
Yeah, basically making it your own.
Exactly. We're refinishing the hardwood floors and just trying to spruce it up a bit.
Yeah, and it sounds like, you got it at such a good deal. Putting that money into it is really easy to do when you say, hey, I could put 30, 40, 50 grand into it, and it's still your purchase plus any of the renovation work is way below the appraised value. So, it sounds like you had this really amazing deal. All right, so you bought the house, you're doing some cosmetic work, pulling out some of that knob and tube, which, I live down in New Orleans. I'm super familiar with knob and tube. We just closed on our 4th house hack, and we're actually pulling out some of the knob and tube that was left in there.
Yeah, it can certainly be pricey, but it's worth it to get that out.
Yep. All right. So you did the work, you let her in there. What type of loan did you end up doing? Did you do an FHA loan or just do a traditional conventional loan?
Well, we were pretty fortunate on that front too, because my husband is a veteran. So we were able to get a VA loan and do 0% down with no PMI. And we've actually never done a VA loan before. And this was a little tricky because most banks don't, even though you can get a VA loan for a 4-unit, most banks don't actually do that per their own internal criteria. So the bank that I normally work with only will do 2-unit VA loans. Many of the other banks I called also had criteria that made it so that we were not able to go through them. So in the end, I just used Veterans United, and that was really a great experience.
Okay, great. And yeah, we'll link to them in the show notes. That way, if anyone has the ability to do a VA loan and they're running into that obstacle. And I think it was good that you mentioned this, because while the VA guidelines might allow up to a 4-unit, banks have their internal guidelines and they don't want to be held liable. And a lot of times banks can be more conservative or a little bit stricter. So we'll definitely link to VA United in the show notes for everyone. But I mean, that's crazy. You bought this awesome property that's way under market value, really cool location, and you did it with a VA loan, so 0% down. I mean, this is just phenomenal. And what'd your mortgage payment end up running you when it was all said and done?
So our final mortgage payment ended up being $2,322.
And is that with your taxes and insurance?
It is.
Okay, great. All right, so you're a little over $2,300 a month. You were spending $1,200 a month, but now you've got the tenant downstairs. And what'd you do for her? Is it sort of on a handshake basis, or did you actually have her sign a lease? Is it an open-ended lease or sort of month to month?
So she said that she wanted to stay for at least 2 years. So we wrote a 2-year lease with an auto renewal at the end of that. So we'll just see how it goes.
Okay, great. And just out of curiosity, what do you think market rent would be for that first floor level? I know you gave her a discount to try to lock down the property at $850 a month. You know, what do you think you could actually rent that lower unit for?
I would estimate $1,250. Like if I had to put it on the market today, I would put it on at $1,250 with no renovations. If we did some cosmetic updates, we can probably get between $15 and $18.
Oh my goodness! I mean, that's huge. Even at $1,250, I mean that's enormous. And what about the second floor? Same thing, about same square footage, 2-1. Now that you've done some cosmetic work to it, would it also rent in that $1,500 to $1,800 range?
That's what I would list it for, yes.
And then what about?
And I actually tend to be a little bit conservative in my rent numbers. So
Yep, nothing wrong with that. I think that's good to be conservative up front, and then if you come out better, that's great. But I think a lot of times people are too optimistic when they're running their numbers. And then that 700 square foot attic space, when you move out, what do you think that would actually rent for?
I'm thinking with the renovations that we already did, it would be right around $1,000.
I mean, so you're really looking at the low end, $1,500, $1,000. I mean, you're essentially, when you're done with this property, you know, you could be bringing in, you know, $4,000 to $4,600 and have a mortgage payment of $2,300. So there's plenty of margin in there to cover the mortgage, put money aside for maintenance and CapEx and for vacancy, and still have a healthy profit.
There is. And honestly, I mean, this is, as I mentioned before, is a very high demand area. And we have a number of other rentals in the neighborhood. And I have a 0% vacancy rate over the last 7 years, I would say.
Yeah, I just think this is crazy because even as is, I mean, long term, when you want to move out, it's going to be a killer rental. Then in the short term, I mean, you went from $1,200 a month in a mortgage payment to $2,300, but you back out the rent, so now you're down to $1,500. But I mean, you more than doubled your square footage, and your housing is costing you, you know, $300, $350 a month. I mean, that's like a super house hack win right there.
It really is. It really felt like a no-brainer.
Yeah, double the space for only a housing costs of like $300 to $400 a month. Yeah, really, really cool. All right, so the woman downstairs, she's on a 2-year lease. How you collect and rent? Does she just bring up a check? Do you use any sort of software, property management software? I mean, how does that all work?
So for our other rentals, we actually, through our bank, have a system called MoneyLink. And even if you don't bank at my bank, you're able to go ahead and link up to my account. So most of my tenants pay directly through MoneyLink. Now, our first floor tenant is older and was not comfortable with setting that all up. So we went old fashioned. I went to my bank. I got a piece of paper that we had to fill out and sign and then return physically to the bank. And now we're set up on an automatic payment.
I'm guessing she's probably 60s or 70s or maybe a little bit older.
She just turned 85.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah. I've had some tenants like that are definitely that older generation. And if you try to do anything electronic or software online, they're just not comfortable with it at all.
Yeah. And really, she is the ultimate house hacker because she bought this property 40 years ago, has lived in all 3 units over the years, as I mentioned, with or without her children. And now she's just simplifying her estate by selling it off so that they don't have to deal with that. And it's really brilliant.
Yeah, very, very cool story that she had, and now you're sort of taking over. All right, so I just want to talk a little bit about, the living situation. So you said the second floor is your living space, and then the attic is where your sort of bedrooms are. Is that right?
No, not exactly. So there's the 2 bedrooms on each floor. And so the kids, right now, we're actually all living on the 3rd floor as we renovate the 2nd floor. But we will be moving our bedroom down to the 2nd floor this week, as a matter of fact. And then the kids will each have their own room upstairs. They'll have a living space. And my youngest son is super excited to have his own kitchen. All the science experiments can happen. All of the crazy cooking can happen up here. And then my husband and I will have our bedroom and bathroom downstairs and then our communal kitchen and living space.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, I don't have kids at this point, but I would imagine someone might be listening and they could be thinking, oh my goodness, my kids are going to be in a full separate unit. What if someone just walks up there or the kids can walk out and go out the front door and I never notice them leaving? I mean, how do you manage that? Or is there like a common hallway where they got to walk by the door to the 2nd floor unit? I mean, can you just describe that a little bit for us?
Yes. So part of what made this really feel like the right thing was when you walk up to the house, there's 2 front doors. And the front door on the left actually goes up to the 2nd and then 3rd floor. So that is our household right there. And then the other front door goes into our tenant's 1st floor apartment.
Oh, so yeah.
Really, it lends itself to this. And then there is also a back staircase that hits all 3 units. But they do have to pass that 2nd floor either way.
Yeah, so basically your front door is the front door for the 2 units, and then you can just leave the front door actually into your unit open, and you can see the kids walking up and down, and they can move all back and forth. Okay, yeah, that's a really cool setup, and I think it fits really well for this family situation.
I think so too. And we're still growing into it, but I actually think we're going to remove the front door on the 2nd floor so that it just is open to that staircase and it all flows a little bit more cleanly.
Oh yeah. And that's something easy to add back in too. I mean, adding in a exterior entry door is pretty easy to do when you're done.
Yes, for sure.
Awesome. I mean, I think you just have this incredible house hack experience that you took over from like the ultimate house hacker woman that had lived there for several decades. I mean, if you're thinking back through this period, what do you feel like your biggest success was with this project so far?
Well, I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. I think that I would be remiss to not list that as our biggest success because honestly, I mean, it's a great arrangement for a really great price.
Yeah, I haven't heard people getting amazing deals like that in 2019. Yeah, I've heard people getting deals like that back in like 2012 and 2013 and 2014. But, getting a property, $100,000 below market value and being a triplex and having lake views is a pretty amazing thing.
We're very fortunate.
And then, I know you've only been in there 5 months, coming up on 6 months. I mean, what's been the biggest challenge so far with this new property?
So we actually haven't physically been here quite that long because there were tenants in place when we closed in June. So they weren't fully moved out until the end of August. So we really have only been in here for a pretty short period of time. I think that the hardest thing is moving kids is always a little bit of a challenge. And my older son really adjusted well, but my younger one definitely had a few bouts of tears missing the old house, which then made me miss the old house.
Oh.
So that was the thing that was a challenge for us to get through. But he's already really feeling positive about the space. So.
Well, that's great. And I imagine that can be really hard having kids and moving them. Did they have to change schools or was it all close enough where they still could see their normal friends and still go to the same school?
We actually only moved 2 blocks. So that part was pretty smooth and easy.
Yeah. So I guess my next question is, would you actually do another house hack again? Or what's your plan of how long do you think you'll actually stay in this property?
Well, we plan on staying here indefinitely, to be honest with you. I think this is really once everything is said and done and the dust settles, I really think that this is our forever home. It feels really good and right to us, even though we still have a lot to do. It's funny. I knew you were going to ask if we would do it again. And in some ways, I feel like I threw my whole life in a blender because moving is traumatic and we have not done it in so long that like touching all of your things. And I think when you move a short distance, like 2 blocks, you underestimate how much of a hassle that actually is. So I'm sure I would do it again, but it's all a little fresh right now. I wouldn't recommend moving with any frequency.
Yeah, I know. It's almost exactly the same amount of work to move, whether it's 2 blocks or 200 miles away. It's like you still got to pack up stuff but you start to think like, oh, it's only 2 blocks. This is really easy. I can just do little trips back and forth. And yeah, it's definitely as much work. I mean, so you think you'll stay in the home till the kids go off to college and then potentially move back to your previous home that you love?
We're kind of debating right now. We wanted to keep the other house just to make sure, in part to make sure that we really were going to be comfortable here. But we are debating because we might want to take advantage of the opportunity to sell within, having lived in the house 2 of 5 years and avoid that capital gain. So we're trying to decide what the best move is with the other house. And if we will sell in the next couple of years or if we'll go ahead and keep it long term.
Gotcha. Now, I know as we were talking, you've mentioned several other properties. So you were pretty much expanding and growing as a real estate investor before you did a full multifamily house hack. Is that right?
Sort of. I'm kind of a reluctant landlord, I guess. So I was very excited about buying our first rental property back in 2005. And we bought a single family home. And for the most part, we've had really great experiences with it. And then about 5 years ago, right next to that single family home are 2 duplexes. And they were, it was, the owner occupied one of those 4 units and he passed away. And all of the neighbors kind of kept knocking on our door and saying, you should really buy these. And I was like, nope, not interested, not going to do it. We're happy with our one single family rental. And then I went and looked at the property and again, it's an older house with all of the character and also all of the challenges that come along with that. And it was really in rough shape. And ironically, I saw how bad it was. And I was like, okay, I'm in. let's do this thing. So we've spent the better part of the last 5 years renovating those units one by one. We just finished. And part of the reason I was looking at moving is because we put all this time and energy into making those units really beautiful and modern while still honoring the historic character of the house. And I kind of wanted to do that for us. So that's how we started on this path.
Yeah, that's really cool. I know a lot of folks actually start with a house hack as a way to dip their toe into real estate investing. And you sort of did it this other way of like buying a single family, starting to buy some small multifamily, and then the right situation came around and you got this amazing house hack deal. I mean, it's just such a cool story, and I really appreciate you being on and sharing it with us. But before we let you go, what we like to do is ask all of our guests a set of final 6 questions that we like to call the
Famous 6.
All right, you ready for the 6 questions?
I am.
All right, number 1, what is your favorite personal finance blog, book, or podcast that you've read or listened to recently?
I feel like it's kind of a tie between Mr. Money Mustache and Go Curry Cracker. And it's funny that I have such an affinity for them because they are not big fans of real estate. And obviously we're quite invested in real estate, but I really appreciate their advice and their individual takes.
Yeah, I really Mr. Money Mustache was that sort of early retirement idea that first came about for me. I don't always agree with the extreme frugality side, but I can't knock it. It really sort of put me on a personal finance track and helped accelerate my thinking on stuff. And I love Go Curry Cracker as well. And I'll link to those in the show notes for anyone that's listening that wants to follow up on them. All right. And then number 2, what is your favorite real estate related blog, book, or podcast?
I would have to say Bigger Pockets. I haven't been on there in a while, but certainly I found it incredibly useful over the years.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's a pretty common answer. If you're doing anything in the real estate world, they're sort of like the biggest and baddest website on the block.
They truly are.
All right. Now, going on to number 3, what has been your favorite travel destination you've been to so far?
This is a really hard question. We travel pretty extensively. I would have to say probably my favorite so far has been Japan. I took the kids on a month tour of Asia, and we spent a couple weeks in Tokyo and really, really loved it.
Ooh, yeah. Well, I've been wanting to go to Japan for the Cherry Blossom Festival. That's on the list. I haven't made it yet, but it's definitely on there. Where else did you go in Asia?
We went to Shanghai, and we spent some time in Seoul as well.
Oh, cool. All right. So then that brings me to number 4. What's next on your travel vacation list?
We are going to be leaving in a few weeks for a road trip. I am driving the kids down to Florida, and we're going to be stopping at quite a few places along the way. And then my husband, the way we typically do our travels, my husband will fly down for like a week in the middle of our trip, and then we'll slowly make our way back home. So we're leaving right after Thanksgiving, and we should be back just before Christmas. Awesome.
All right, moving on to number 5. What's the biggest bucket list item you haven't accomplished yet?
You know, I would like to pick up stakes and live in Europe for a while. I don't know. I don't have any solid plans to do this, but it is something that I would really like to do.
So that's actually on our list as well. I mean, something we've been looking at is, and I'll mention this because you're into real estate investing, is the golden visa opportunity, where if you invest a certain amount into a country, you can then get a visa to be there. So that way, every 90 days, you don't have to leave and come back in. And there's been some really cool options where I found several websites where folks were taking some of their investments in the U.S., using them to buy property in Greece that would then rent out on Airbnb, and that would qualify them for that economic visa. So I think it's this really cool idea. I'm just starting to play with the idea, but we'd love to spend a majority of our 40s either in Asia or Europe. So we're right there with you.
That's a great approach.
All right. And then number 6, and the final question is, what is your favorite life hack?
Honestly, I'd have to say just living below your means. I mean, it really, the amount of stress and pressure that takes off of your life is just, it's unbeatable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, life's so much better if you're not stressed about the paycheck, and it's hard to have money to invest if you're not living below your means. So yeah, great house hack, or a great life hack tip, I should say. Also a good house hack story that you have as well.
And there's one more thing, actually, one of your questions brought up that I did not mention, and we're still playing with this idea, but I just found out that someone in our neighborhood lists their whole house on Airbnb for something that I consider outrageous, like $1,000 a night. And because of our location and festivals and events that happen in the area, they actually book about 10 nights a year. And I'm just feeling like we might want to try and figure out some way to take advantage of that idea. Especially with the 2 units, I feel like we could potentially rent out one of the units and everyone can sleep on the other floor. And there's just a lot of flexibility there.
Yeah, for $1,000 a night, I'd be happy to sleep on a floor, right?
Yeah, me too.
Or I mean, for $1,000 a night, it's like, hey, if they're going to book for a long weekend, let's go do a road trip somewhere fun or take a nice little trip and rent out the place.
Exactly. You could still really net a great amount doing that.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Cheryl, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your house hacking story. I really appreciate it. It was so fun talking with you.
Well, I appreciate it too. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the House Hacking Podcast. For more up-to-date information on house hacking, to access links and resources mentioned in today's show, and connect with a guest and host, head over to www.fibrei.com. That's www.fibrei.com, where your house hacking journey begins.